Good afternoon and welcome to NCUI's Homelessness and Housing Insecurity in the Era of COVID-19 Community of Learning. This is session one of a three-session series, and this particular session addresses strategic planning and youth homelessness, how to create successful homeless services and resources. Our, it's a 1 hour presentation, and we ask that as you enter the room that you enter your name, your title, and your organization and tribal affiliation in the chat box so that we'll know who's joining us today. So take a few moments to enter your information in our chat box and we'll get underway shortly. My name's Mark Clark and I'll be your host for today's session. Good afternoon. Once again, my name is Mark Clark. I'm Senior Program Manager with NCUI's Technical Assistance Division. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the Homelessness and Housing Insecurity Community of Learning. Homelessness and Housing Insecurity in the Era of COVID-19 is our theme for this three-session series. And this is session number one on strategic planning and youth homelessness, how to create successful homeless services and resources. We're asking that as you enter the room, you enter your name, title, your organization, and tribal affiliation in the chat box so we'll know who's joined us today. And we'll get underway in just a few moments. Well, thank you. And again, welcome aboard. We ask that you enter your name, organization, title, and tribal affiliation in the chat box as you enter. We're going to go ahead and get started. And we have a few housekeeping tips to share with you as we move forward to introduce today's presenter. This webinar is being recorded and your mics have been muted. Unless otherwise directed, you'll need to raise your hand to get our attention. You can get our attention to signify that you'd like to make a comment throughout the session, and we will acknowledge you in the chat box. You can also enter written comments into the chat box, and we'll try and keep the flow of our conversation going. Diana's asked that questions be consistently or continuous throughout the program, so we'll try and keep it conversational. The Q&A session will still be held at the end of this session, and so you'll be ample opportunities to interact with one another. The slides and recording will be available shortly at the landing page shown on the screen, nikui.org/homelessness on our webpage. And we really encourage you to complete an evaluation that will follow immediately at the end of this session, so we can get your feedback and get some insights into topics and information you'd love to see featured in this series. Next slide, please. So in order to ask a question, your controls in the Zoom room are shown at the bottom. The arrow indicates where you can ask for entering the chat box, or alternatively, how you can type a question into the chat box. Again, we'll keep our eye on the chat box and make sure that we share information as you enter it, so that we keep the atmosphere conversational in our community of learning. Next slide, please. Today's guest presenter is Yazzie Devine. I'd like to share a little bit of information about Diana. Diana Yazzie Devine is the president and CEO of Native American Connections. She's been working with Native American, urban, and tribal entities since 1972 and has been employed as the CEO of Native American Connections since 1979, for over 40 years. NAC is a 501c3 Native American operated nonprofit corporation that provides comprehensive behavioral health services, affordable housing, and community-based economic development opportunities. With Native Americans determined as a priority population, NAC offers innovative research-based residential and outpatient behavioral health services integrated with Native cultural and traditional healing practices. In addition, NAC developed, owns, and operates over 1,000 units of affordable housing for working families and permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals along the light rail in Central Phoenix, and shelter and transitional housing for homeless youth aged 18 to 24. NAC is also a leader in multifamily housing in the LEED Platinum Certified Housing Certified Building. In 2016, NAC, in partnership with the City of Phoenix and the Phoenix Indian Center, renovated one of the remaining Phoenix Indian schools from 1891 to 1990 buildings, and now operates the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center and Gallery at Steele Indian School Park, telling the 99-year history of the school. Ms. Devine has an MBA from Arizona State University and was inducted into the ASU W.P. Carey School of Business Hall of Fame in 2012. Ms. Devine holds international and state licenses in substance abuse counseling. Ms. Devine's leadership and dedication have been recognized within the community and with a host of honors. Diane asked us to have an abbreviated discussion of all the honors, but 40 years of service is reflected in the array of the amount of recognition that Diane has received. On June 4th in 2019, Ms. Devine was celebrated her 40th anniversary with Native American Connections. So I'd like to ask you to welcome Diana, and without further ado, I'm passing the baton to our guest presenter, Diana Yazzie Devine.
Thank you, Mark. So I'm hoping you can see my screen. You can see my slide?
Yes.
So thank you, Mark, and thank you, Nikui, for making housing an important topic. Housing was a problem before COVID, but has really come to the forefront as essential to healthcare outcomes. We all know that if you don't have a safe place to live, if you're homeless on the street, you have health conditions that are comorbid with COVID, that it's risky and life-threatening. And so I think it's really important that we address housing and healthcare together during this very difficult time. In Maricopa County is the second largest. I'm coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona, and Maricopa County is the second largest county in the United States. And our continuum of care, our HUD continuum of care point and time count has about, oh, this has got my slide in it. This is double that, about 480 homeless youth on any given night on the streets of Phoenix. About 40% of those youth are approached for labor and sex trafficking within 48 hours of becoming homeless. 30% are LGBTQ, and about 30% are former foster care involved. So it's a very vulnerable population that's homeless on the streets of Phoenix. And we know that there's a much larger number of homeless youth that are couch surfing and living in temporary shelter that are both under and over the age of 18. So Native American Connections, we operate really the only youth shelter in our entire county, which is, you know, like I said, the second largest county. We operate 25 shelter beds. And there's other shelters that take over 18, but this is the only shelter that really focuses on that age group, 18 to 24. And I'll be telling you why that's so important. And just here's some of our youth that are here during COVID. I want to say that in April, we talked about limiting new admissions into the shelter just because it's congregate living. They live in a dormitory style living. Some shelters you have to leave during the day, but in our youth shelter, you actually come. It's a no barrier shelter, and you live there, and it's dormitory style for youth to a dorm. And so we were very concerned. We actually had a COVID hotspot in April where we had 25 of the 25 youth that were positive for COVID. So it was a real wake-up call for us to say, you know, to do all the things that we all know are so important now. Wear a mask, social distance, you know, wash your hands. We changed our sanitation. We have testing protocols now. We're all either the youth coming into our shelter or residential substance use treatment or any of our dormitory style shelters or living where we test and isolate until we get the results of the test. And so our youth are able to test each week. And as they test negative, they're able to enter into the regular shelter environment. We participate in youth coordinated entry. I don't know if any of you have ever heard me present, but we do prioritize Native American people in our coordinated entry prioritization. And we work with all the other youth providers on a weekly case staffing, case manager, case staffing in terms of how full is your shelter? Where are the beds available? Who are you outreaching? What kind of services are you providing? And so that's a weekly case staffing session. Like I said, it's a no barrier shelter, which just means there is no reason why a youth doesn't come in immediately if there's a bed available, as long as we're assessing safety to self and safety to others. And we do participate in using the VI SPDAT and the HMIS system to prioritize and to determine their homelessness and the needs they have. And then we do partner with a medical provider, a youth medical provider, Phoenix Children's Hospital, to complete a medical assessment. As soon as the youth come in, it's about a 2-week period in which we really just focus on doing all those assessments, making sure that they have their medical needs taken care of. And we begin looking at some of their mental health needs. And if you remember the first slide that I talked about in terms of being vulnerable, living on the streets and being homeless, we're assessing, childhood trauma and, the effects maybe of foster care. Some of our LGBTQ youth have been, kicked out of their own homes or kicked out of our foster care environment because of their sexual orientation. And so we're just really kind of assessing, letting people sleep, eat, feel better, feel safe and secure now that they're in a shelter surrounded by other, youth. We do have a large adult shelter, single shelter here in Maricopa County, and it has around 600 beds. And we have a human service campus by the shelter, and youth have told us that they just don't feel safe and comfortable there, and they feel very vulnerable. So being in our shelter, it takes a while for them to feel that safety. And then after about 2 weeks, then we begin engaging them and the life skills that they're going to need, and the behavioral health services in order to continue to work on some of those mental health and substance use needs that they have. When you're planning for your youth shelter, when we were planning for the shelter, I mean, it's really important to really determine, we have 1,000 units of housing, and each one of our housing communities, it's 23 different sites, has a little bit different focus. It could be seniors, it could be chronic homeless, it could be very low income families, it could be transitional housing, it could be rapid rehousing. And so knowing what age, gender, and demographic you want to serve in terms of your program design is really important. And so that's where you need to start. Who do we want to serve? Who do we want to prioritize? Because everything you do after that will determine what your facility is like, what your programming is like, what your budgets are like. And so really, if you're just thinking about how you want to serve the homeless population, and that first step of age, gender, and other demographics is really important. When we're developing a site, we do 3 budgets for every project that we have. So the first budget we start developing is really the facility. How are we going to build the facility? And you need that, the age and gender and who you're going to serve to really determine the size and the architectural design of that facility. And so included in that facility development are your architectural costs, your land costs, and construction of the building. What's the number of units? What's the size of the facility? At home base, at our shelter, we have a commercial kitchen because I told you that the youth actually live there. So we provide 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. And we have a great native chef named Donovan. And providing those 3 meals a day is really part of their food security as well. And so if you need a commercial kitchen, you really need to plan for that because it's expensive to build and you have to maintain it. And so after, a lot of times people, when they're thinking about a project and we want to serve this population, they just think about the facility. But once that facility is built, you got to make sure that you can operate it. And so you have to have the funding available. And actually the funding for home base comes from, I'm going to say probably 60% of it is government funded. We have funds because we're not a tribal, entity. Our funds come through the city, the county, and the state. And so home base is actually, the operations of home base is funded by ESG, the City of Phoenix, the Emergency Shelter Grant, the ESG funds. We also have state housing funds, ESG funds. And then we have funds that come through our Department of Economic Security for youth, for homeless youth, and TANF funds that come from the state. The county, we have a county contract that uses CDBG. And then we have also rapid rehousing through our ESG contract with the City of Phoenix. And I know those are a lot of acronyms, but those of you who work in housing are pretty familiar with them. But if you're not, I'm happy to continue this conversation or answer those questions at the end of the presentation or even afterwards. Mark is very well aware that I'm open for continued conversation in depth more about the financing and the development, which is sometimes the hardest to put together. And then we have to fund, so now you've funded your facility development, you've funded your operations of your building, and now you're gonna fund your the staffing of the program as well. And so you got to determine what your case management ratio is. Home base is 24/7, so we need to make sure we have staff 24/7. And you know, you have to make sure the kids are fed, the lights are paid, and all that kind of stuff. So we find that because we are a integrated health organization as well, that we provide the mental health and physical health services and the substance use counseling right on site at the youth shelter. And so this is actually what it costs to operate home base. It's about $650,000 a year. This is the budget that, this is actually last year's budget. And so you can see that predominantly the cost of operating is really in your staffing pattern, particularly when we're running 24/7. And then you have your general facility costs in terms of utilities and maintenance and repairs and tenant improvements, your technology, transportation costs, and those kind of things. But this is a fairly standard budget for us. And so, you know, so our ESG, our shelter, emergency shelter funds, our CDBG funds, our rapid rehousing, our TANF, and all those funds are paired together to fill the operating budget. We did get COVID funds from the city of Phoenix, about $100,000 of COVID funds to actually keep our shelter open, expand it, to do the cleaning that we need to do some of the training, and some of the sanitation supplies as well. And so just really focusing on the youth, really understanding that they can play and they can feel good and they don't need to, you know, be feel vulnerable in the shelter. And so right next to the shelter, we actually have 3 facilities right next to each other. We have a transitional housing for homeless youth right next to that. And so I thought it would be important to kind of talk about transitional housing, because where do the youth go from the shelter? And I was looking at the numbers from last year compared to this year in terms of length of stay. And last year, the length of stay for our youth was 67 days. And this year it's about 10 days less. And I was asking our site supervisor there why he thought it might be a little less. And he said that, you know, that because it is dormitory style, that might make people, you know, want to move on to transitional housing to get, you know, to get a job and to move into their own apartment unit. So from the shelter, last year we had 86% of the youth that had a positive exit from the shelter. And this year, 81% of them had a positive exit. So still maintaining the importance of youth going to having a positive exit when they leave the shelter. So anyway, many of them are going into our transitional housing. Once they have income, they are paying no more than 30% of their income. And so this is for our working youth. We're really teaching what we always say at our shelter. It's easy to get a youth a job. What's really hard is for them to have the life skills and the, you know, to maintain their job and to maintain their housing. Easy to get, hard to, you know, have the consistency of maintaining that. So our youth are paying no more than 30% of their income. The average rent is just with a minimum wage job And Phoenix in Arizona is $12 an hour. They're paying about $625 a month, and that includes their utilities. We don't have any deposit or any application fees, and we generate about $180,000 in revenue if all the units are full. And actually, I think I have a slide that shows you how much it takes to operate the site, and it's less than that revenue. So the rents alone, if youth are able to maintain their job and pay their rent, can operate the site. We do take rapid rehousing vouchers. We have foster care vouchers. Again, the transitional housings for age 18 to 24, housing choice vouchers, and they can stay up to 36 months. And there's our operating budget for the transitional housing program, $164,000 for to operate the site. And if you focus on your rent collections and keeping youth employed and keeping them stable, we do have a lot of foundation support. The youth eat over at the shelter, so they get their meals over there. There's a lot of synergy having the two facilities right next to each other, but you can see that that this building can maintain itself. We did renovate that facility. I'm just going to go back to that picture. We did. I have there's one of our youth going into his home. This is the very first time he's had his own apartment. And there's his room. That's a studio unit. We took a 1960s apartment complex, 24 units, and renovated it. The cost of renovation was about $3 million. It took only about 6 months to renovate. And let's see, I do have where those funds came from as well. So through the city of Phoenix, we had $1 million of home funds through the Department of Housing, the Housing Trust Fund, that was $500,000. From our Medicaid access program, our Medicaid program, $250,000 of healthcare investment into stable housing for youth. And we raised the rest of the funds from different foundations. And so when we opened and renovated this facility, we wanted to make sure we didn't have any debt service, so that the cost of operations was really could be generated from the rents that the youth paid. But you can see this is a very nice apartment. The bathroom's on the other side of that wall. And so they have a very nice place to call home themselves. And I just love this picture. He was so happy to have his very own apartment, and it was filled, the refrigerator was filled with food, and we had all the sheets, blankets, towels, and kitchen equipment that they needed, bathroom supplies, cleaning supplies. And so to walk into that was just really nice. And here he is serving coffee and tea. So I'm sure you realize that a lot of our homeless youth have a high incidence of mental health issues, domestic violence, youth suicide, and unintentional injury. And when we discovered that their substance use disorder gets in the way of their stable employment or stable housing, we're able to intervene, and they can go into our residential treatment center, into our wellness and healing center. And then one of the nice things about having recovery services right within our own continuum of care is when they complete their residential stay, they can go back to their apartment, continue on in our outpatient program, go back to work and receive their services either on site or in our outpatient program. And so here's a picture of our residential treatment center. We have a 70-bed facility, and next month in January, we're going to be opening another 50-bed residential treatment center. So when Mark was doing the introduction, he was talking about how we use SAMHSA best practices, and it is a medically licensed facility in the state of Arizona, but we know that those traditional healing services are really what ensure long-term recovery. And so we have 2 sweat lodges on our property, a women's lodge and a men's lodge. And then I just wanted to show you an example of one of our permanent supportive housing. So the shelter, the average length of stay is, I'm going to say probably 6 months. And then you saw the transitional housing, it's up to 36 months, but we also operate about 400 units of permanent supportive housing, which is a place where people can permanently call home. We don't have a lot of youth that are in permanent supportive housing because with the right level of support and intervention in their homelessness, they can, move on into, market rate housing or some kind of financially supported housing, but doesn't need the level of supportive service that permanent housing does for chronic homeless individuals. So this is one of our Canto Point facilities. This was new construction. This is the apartment complex at our permanent housing. And when youth do have chronic conditions, whether that's mental illness or brain injury or some kind of other permanent debilitating illness that might cause them to need a higher level of supportive housing for a long period of time, they're eligible for our permanent supportive housing as well. So a place where they can feel secure and safe and build a sense of community in their own apartment home, for a long period of time. There's the unit. I wanted to just show you that about food security is really an important part of our program. These are actually our youth and our permanent supportive housing communities that are taking care of this community garden together, teaching the youth the importance of understanding where your food comes from, understanding the importance of healthy food. And we have 4 commercial kitchens across Native American Connections, and we've really focused on going back into teaching indigenous food sources and eating in a much healthier lifestyle. And so youth are also then eligible for our affordable housing for working, it says working families, but it can be working individuals as well. And as we know, families can be, roommates or, LGBTQ relationships, or they can be defined in many different ways. And so once they have a stable job and have maybe been on our transitional housing, they're eligible for our affordable housing. And this is one of our affordable housing communities in downtown Phoenix. It's 75 units, and it has right along the walkway there's some live work units where you have a studio on the ground floor. Some of our Native American artists have their studio on the ground floor, and then they live in an apartment unit right on top of it. And in our affordable housing units, we're really focusing on our children, and that the family is paying no more than 30% of their income. So here our rents start at about $500 a month, and utilities are not included in our affordable housing. The utilities are the responsibility of the tenant. But still, in downtown Phoenix, our average rents are about $1,800 to $2,000 a month. So paying $500 a month is a very affordable rent for our families. And one of the things that we know that stable housing significantly improves the educational attainment of the children. They have higher GPA rates, they have higher high school graduation rates. That when families don't need to move, they don't need to be afraid of rents being increased and they can't afford it anymore, and look at the quality of housing where they can live. And this is also permanent housing. So there's no end to our affordable housing. As long as somebody pays their rent, they can stay there until raise their family there for 15, 20 years and not be afraid of losing their housing. And I think Mark also talked about in his introduction that we, right outside my office window was the former Phoenix Indian School. It operated from 1891 to 1990. And when it closed in 1990, the Department of Interior traded it and ended up becoming a park with the city of Phoenix. Long story, which I won't tell you now, but it was very frustrating to look and know that for 100 years the Indian school was there and that the Native American community no longer had a presence there. So about 10 years ago, we began talking to the city of Phoenix. We renovated this historic building, and now we tell the authentic historical stories of the children that went to school there. This is actually a picture of the students in front of that building, that same building. This was in 1951. And so I think as we talk about youth and homelessness, it's really important to remember the forced removal of children from their families, and that many of our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents experienced that removal and placed in a boarding school. And so making sure that we're addressing that historical trauma, that we're developing the new life skills and the patterns of being able to, live in your own, to feel the sense of housing security and safety. In Arizona in 2019, in Phoenix alone, this is prior to COVID, in 2019, Phoenix had 25,000 evictions, and the state of Arizona did 45,000 evictions. So this is prior to COVID. So there's a lot of people in Phoenix right now that are very, very nervous about, because we've had a eviction moratorium. Our governor had a eviction moratorium from March until through October. Now there's still the national moratorium from the CDC that prevents evictions until the end of December. But there's an estimated $70 billion of unpaid rent across the United States, with the average family owing about $5,000 in past rent. So there's an awful lot of people that are very, very nervous of the impact of COVID on people's housing security, and what that's going to happen. We're pushing for very robust, easy, robust rental assistance. We'd like to see rental assistance. We're coming out for multiple months eligibility and really trying to cure those past due rents before the moratorium hits, ends in the end of December. So in Phoenix alone, over a 5-year period, 1/3 of the renters in Maricopa County, remember the second largest county in the United States, in a 5-year period, 1 in 3 people were evicted. Zip codes with a high unemployment have the highest eviction rates, and the effect on children, their GPA and their high school graduation rates are enormous. And as you know, to have a safe place to be housed, a safe place where you have digital, where you have connectivity and Wi-Fi for your children to go to school remotely. Housing becomes, safe, stable housing that's affordable, where you're not afraid of eviction, really becomes the key for good health and, access to education and all those things. You can't separate housing from any of those other factors. Housing is considered unaffordable when a person pays more than 30% of your income. It's just a really good indicator that what your rents need to be. The average rent or home price in Arizona has risen exponentially. We're one of the highest rising rents across the country, and our wages have remained stagnant. A person earning minimum wage here in Arizona, $12 an hour, has to work 70 hours a week to almost double a normal work week to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. And so that's why our affordable housing, vouchers, rent control, all of those things are so important. So you need to earn $16.50 per hour when our minimum wage is $12 an hour to really pay no more than 30% of your income. And 50% of our jobs are under $15 an hour. So you can imagine the concern we have about homelessness, the concern we have about affordability, and where that's kind of coming to a crisis during COVID. I already told you this slide right here. So the impact on COVID on Native communities. So in Arizona, 4.5% of our population is Native, and making up, as of September, 11% of our COVID deaths. Right now, 2 of our tribal communities have a complete shutdown, 3-week shutdown, because the COVID death percentages are actually increasing as a percentage in our state. Some of the tribal communities have reported infection rates as high as 20% of the population. In November, so these are very recent, Navajo is one of those communities that just went on a 3-week lockdown. They have over 12,000 COVID positives with almost 600 deaths. And I think now, since even I put this statistic up, they have over 600 deaths. So the challenges are, of course, poverty plays into that, the lack of digital divide to get accurate information, substandard housing, and overcrowded housing with multi-generational families living together. They all lead to these high infection rates and high death rates. And so many of these are all indicators from Navajo Nation, where they have 30% of their housing without running water and 70% of their unpaved roads, and inability to access healthy food, cleaning, and cleaning supplies have all led to the very high COVID rates in that community. And then before I end my presentation and leave you some time for questions, I just thought this was a very, sobering slide. So this was in September, the data from September on COVID deaths. And so they measure deaths per 100,000. That's one of those measurements that tells you about, the incidence of COVID in your community. And this is a US statistic. This is not an Arizona statistic, but the Black community, 97, almost 98% of deaths per 100,000. In Indigenous communities, it's 92% deaths, 92 deaths per 100,000. And the Latino community, 65 deaths per 100,000. And the white community, it's 47 deaths per 100,000. And so really the question here is, if Black and brown communities died at the same death rate as whites, who would still be alive? 21,000 African Americans, 11,000 Latinos, and almost 1,000 Indigenous people would still be here. And that really speaks to the inequities, the health and housing, economic, criminal justice inequities that Black and brown communities experience. And housing has elevated as one of the most important stabilizing factors in healthcare outcomes. So I hope I gave you some things to think about, and you might have some questions. We have about 15 minutes, and so I'm going to hand it back to Mark, and I think they had a closing slide, and then we can I can answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Diana. Just really vital information. I'm so impressed with the degree of complexity of the operations that you're part of, as well as the way in which care is integrated into everything you're doing. The question and answer moment has arrived. For those of you who'd like to enter a question into the chat box, please feel free to. If you'd like to indicate by showing your hand or by using the raising the hand feature, we can unmute your mic and allow you to speak directly to Diana to ask your question. So we'll give you a few moments to get your thoughts together. I had just was reflecting back on the last time you were able to share information with us, Diana, and I recall how vital you mentioned food security was as a feature of housing, and how that helps to stabilize families as well as young adults. I wonder if you could just chat a little bit more about the role that food and food security in particular plays in that sense of stability.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. We really consider, not only access to food, but access to healthy food. I think sometimes, our food bank is wonderful. Actually, we have a partnership with St. Mary's Food Bank, which is our largest food bank in Arizona, and they deliver a meal 4 days a week for every single child in our affordable housing community. So when our children come home from school, they have what they call Kids Cafe, a nice healthy meal available to them when they get home. And then we have after school tutoring and support for the child until the parent gets off work and gets home. But in the month of June, I think we distribute about 20,000 meals every single month. In June, we distributed, it was just an extraordinary month. We distributed 30,000 meals to our 1,000 housing communities. And anytime you provide food, you're actually helping in terms of disposable income. So people can pay their rent, and they can pay their insurance, and they can pay their gas to get to work, and they can participate in their kids' schools. And so we look at food security. One is actually putting food on the table. Sometimes kids were getting their meals through school. And when the schools went remote, we were very concerned about the lack of food for children. And then food prices have gone up pretty exponentially during COVID. And so anytime that we can provide food, it helps in their food security. It reduces the cost that they need to pay for food. And also because we have that focus on returning to healthy indigenous foods, they're getting a much more healthier, nutritious meal, which helps, in, their immune system and protecting them from, the risk of COVID. So I think it's a three-pronged strategy for us. And like I said, we have 4 commercial kitchens. We actually have a Funds to Feed program right now at the Indian school, where we contract with an indigenous chef, and we're distributing. I love that project because we're actually buying from Native American entrepreneurs, the growers themselves, Ramona Farms from Gila River Indian community, from coffee from Tona Tierra, from central indigenous communities in Central America, honey from the Sanavir, Tohono O'odham Nation Sanavir Co-op. And so we're jump starting some of the small indigenous businesses by buying from them, providing a healthy meal. We're sending meals weekly to our senior housing community and distributing dry goods and fresh totes to our communities weekly. So food's a really important part of our housing and housing security and housing safety.
Wow, thank you for sharing. The chat box remains open for those of you who'd like to type in a question. You're certainly welcome to. I don't want to dominate all the conversation, but there was one of the item you mentioned, and I was genuinely curious about your definition of the term. You used the term positive exit to describe young people leaving shelters, and you noted that there were percentages of young people who achieve that positive exit status. I'm wondering if you could explain that definition of that term and how it might impact the services or the maybe referrals that you make for young people.
Absolutely. So I think sometimes we forget about right up front diversion. You get a homeless youth, they've been out on the streets, they're coming to you, they're, exhausted, and they just need this safe place to be. And, the first thing we do is they're a safe family member that we can reconnect them to. It's not always possible, but youth have this idea that they can't go back, or they've done something, or the family, and we're actually quite surprised that there's a pretty high diversion rate. As soon as we, with the use permission, contact the family, there's quite a large number of them that are able to reconnect with the family. They might stay in shelter for a little while until the family kind of wraps their arms around that, but they rebuild that relationship, they continue to get support, and there's a reconnection. So that's a positive. That's probably one of the best positive outcomes, as long as it's safe for that youth to return to the family. And sometimes it's not, but in many cases. So that diversion, reconnection with family, that's a positive outcome. If the youth has, left a housing environment that they can go back to, maybe they had a roommate and maybe their substance use or something got in the way of that, and they're able to, reconnect, or some of our youth are married, or they're even young mothers that have lost temporary custody of their children, and we're able to get them a uh, DCS voucher, which is our child safety vouchers, or maybe one of the foster care vouchers, and able to get them reconnected with some of those services and back into, a unit where they have support to reunite their family, or to reunite their child. That's a very positive outcome, and we're actually wrapping around additional state, county, and city resources around that youth to be successful. And then they can transition to our transitional housing. They're able to get a job and maintain that job, and then move into our transitional housing. So anything that's really not back to the streets is considered a positive outcome. So anything that's not a return to homelessness, we would determine a positive outcome.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that.
And that's really our goal for everybody. Yeah.
Absolutely, a continuum of sorts. We're going to feature conversations about safe havens as they're described in an upcoming session, and we're going to talk about referral networks for young people as part of this community of learning session as well. I again invite you to enter any question or comment you may have in our chat box. We have a few minutes remaining. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to talk about, there we go. We're the upcoming sessions in our community of learning on homelessness and housing insecurity. December 15th, we'll be discussing how to build safe havens for Native American youth and adults through coalition building. We're going to feature several persons are representing coalition process, and we'll have an opportunity to have a really engaging conversation with organizations that are serving young people, and have strategies about how coalitions help in that service. Then in January, we'll feature a presenter that will discuss best practices for outreach and referrals. I'm really pleased that one of our outreach and referral UIOs will be featured in that presentation, so I'm looking forward to that. That'll be January 26th, again at 1 to 2 p.m. Throughout this entire series, we'll store our slides and handouts as portable document files on the landing page. That's the site that our registration takes you to. So these slides will immediately be available for you in terms of access, Diana's slides, and of course the slides from some of the future organizations. If Noel, could you put our evaluation link in the chat box? I want to catch everyone while we've still got your attention. I really need you to click on the link to our online survey. Give us feedback about how this session went, the information you'd like to see in the future, any feedback we'll be glad to share with Diana. She's graciously agreed to share her expertise in the future. So I'm looking forward to the conversation, this ongoing conversation about homelessness and providing effective services. So please do our online survey. I promise you it'll only take a couple minutes for you to complete it. Click the link in the chat box. It'll take you straight there. It's 1:54. So we had you from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. So if we give you the 6 extra minutes, you use that 6 extra minutes to go and complete that survey for us. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Diana, I want to thank you for just really a wonderful information. I enjoyed your presentation, very helpful information, a lot of great insights into strategic planning and what needs to be done to support the services for our communities. Again, if you will make sure you get to that link, we sure will appreciate your help. We look forward to seeing you later in the winter. December 15th will be our next moment. We'll make sure to share those details with you and send you notices as time goes on. Thank you for your time and attention. Please go complete our end of session survey. Diana, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
I always learn so much when you share with us. So thank you. I want to recognize our comms person who makes it all possible, Noel Zolke. And again, thank those of you who are able to join us and participate. It's been a pleasure. If you complete that survey, we look forward to hearing from you about future information you'd like, other ways in which we can continue to serve you. So thank you for your time and attention. It's been a pleasure working with you. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diana.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.